All right. Well, don't forget to sign in. Thank you for doing that. I see a few of you already doing that. And it's good to see each of you here. And this is exciting class. I'm sure that the main teachers for the class gave you Ms. Potter and Mrs. Royo. I'm still getting used to calling her Mrs. Royo. I've known her for many years as Ms. Montes, so if I slip every now and then, I'm still getting used to that. I'm sure they talked with you some about what's going on with this class and the point of this class. This is a class that I am only a little bit involved in. As you can see from the class outline, I give just a few lectures, but it's a class that I'm very excited about. A number of years ago, I'm not sure, maybe 4 or so, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, we had begun some real strategic work on the music program at BGMBC. I started collecting information from several colleges here in the Philippines that have classes, have degrees in music and music education, so like UP, UST, Philippine Women's, Philippine Normal, whatever I could gather. And then I gathered information from several universities that I had connections with in the US, both some secular universities and Christian universities and colleges as well. And as we were praying and talking and planning, making our plans for our bachelor's degree, one of the things that jumped out at me from one particular university was that in their first semester, they had a class that was not quite a full music theory class. Typically, most colleges, first semester, you're in Music Theory 1. And then you progress from there through normally 4 semesters or 5 semesters of music theory. And that's how we had been doing things in the associate's degree. And we were very happy with that. However, we knew always that for many of our incoming music majors, that first semester of music theory was very difficult because some of the incoming music majors had only a little bit of formal training. They already had some good skills on an instrument that they had developed, sometimes mostly by Guido. They had natural abilities. They passed the live portions of the audition, but their music reading skills were weak, and that made music theory very hard because music theory the music theory classes start with the assumption that you already are comfortable with music notation, reading written music and writing out music, etc. It starts with that kind of assumption. And so we had the music reading seminar, which was a good review or help for people, etc. But we knew some students struggled with music theory, not so much because of the content, but because they were not very solid yet in their handling of music notation. And we struggled with what the best answer for that was because we did not want to weaken our music theory sequence. It's a very professional level of training, similar to what you would find at any of the music colleges in Metro Manila or around the world. And we didn't want to change that. We were very happy with that. We wanted to improve it and strengthen it, but we did not want to weaken it in any way. And then I discovered at one particular university that they had a basic musicianship class in the first semester and then began the music theory sequence in the second semester. And we started as a faculty talking about that idea. What if we had a pre-music theory class that would make sure every student is ready, strong in their handling of music notation, but also introduction to solfeggio and sight singing, and introductions to being a music major, quite honestly. What does it mean to be a college level serious student of music? Because none of you have ever been to college as a music major, I don't think. And that's a whole different world and a whole different animal. And being a music major is hard. A music major degree, no matter where you go, is hard. There's so many things that you have to acquire, so many skills, so many areas of knowledge. And so we felt like we wanted to create, well, we knew we wanted to create a class that would prep students first and foremost for the music theory and ear training sequence. So that's a large part of what basic musicianship is about. It's like a pre-theory, pre-ear training. It's getting you ready. But we also wanted it to be an entrance into being a music major. So we used to do special seminars or music forum lectures on other topics, like being a musician, like practicing, things like that. And we thought, let's pull all of that into the basic musicianship class so that by the end of first semester, you are well situated to be successful as a music major. And we have seen really significant results from that. Since we instituted that, the level of success in all of those areas increased right away. And so we're very happy about that, because our goal is that you get as much out of BGMBC as you can. And both in terms of what you're going to do for ministry, but also in terms of being a professional musician. This is, whether you're in the associate's or the bachelor's degree, we are trying to give you a professional level of training. Just like in the Bible side, they're trying to give a professional level of training for those who are going to be primarily pastors and preachers and church planters. So we're trying to do the same thing on the music side, and so that whatever God's will for you is in the future, if you're teaching in a school, if you're teaching studio, if your primary work is in the local church, you will have the knowledge and the skills to do those things successfully. And then, of course, we have you go through much Bible, because we want you to be especially equipped for the work of the ministry. I do want you to be equipped to open up a private music studio, if that's how the Lord leads, or teach music in a school situation, teach mape, direct a school choir, maybe start a barangay team choir, or start a little orchestra in a barangay or in a job. One of our graduates was working at a call center, and they started up a choir, and he became the accompanist and the assistant director for this company choir. I want you to be equipped for any of those kinds of things, because you never know how the Lord is going to lead and what opportunities he's going to give you. And I know that for many of you, you will need to make a living when you get out of college. Maybe God is not calling you to be a full-time church worker, but God does call you to be heavily involved in the music ministry and other parts of the ministry of your church. If that's God's plan for you, then obviously you still need to eat and make a living and support a family. And so we want the training to be such that you would be equipped to make a living as a musician if you needed to. So all of those kinds of things go into both our thinking about the degree, the 2 degrees, and about this class in particular. Now, you'll notice that my topic today has to do with practicing. And I'm going to do something different with you than I have done in the past. In the past, I have talked about practicing and given a lot of very practical helps. And then you notice in the class outline that my wife is scheduled to give some talks about practicing as well, especially practicing piano. Well, we discovered last year that I had stolen her notes on practicing, and when I was giving my talk on practicing, I was saying things that she was planning on saying in her talk on practicing. I didn't quite realize I was a thief until then. And I found out I was. And so I realized number one, I needed to change that. That wasn't very nice of me. And number two, I started thinking about other things that I felt were important regarding practicing. And so I'm going to talk to you differently than I've ever talked with any of the other basic musicianship students about this subject. And then my wife will be giving you especially the very, very practical help. So I'm going to veer a little bit towards philosophy for a few minutes. And then my wife is going to give you some really very practical helps. I will give a couple practical suggestions about voice practicing and the use of your voice and the care of your voice. So I will touch on that before we're done. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about a theology of practice. Have you ever thought about a theology of practice? I want you to take a moment and try to think of a passage in the Bible or a principle from the scriptures that should influence how you think about practicing. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that and then type it into the chat, okay? So I'm setting my timer now. On your mark, get set, go. All right, time is up, and I see some similar passages there. 1 Corinthians 14:40. Is that doing things decently? Is that okay? And 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Good. 2 Timothy 2:15. That would be what is that? Can somebody, whoever wrote, who wrote that? Let's see. Where'd that go? I lost it. There, okay. Mr. Matsumoto, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your first name, brother. Could you tell us what 2 Timothy 2:15 is talking about?
Sir, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a workman who has no need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's a great passage as well. Colossians 3:23, excellent. Okay, so Psalm 33:3. So lots of great passages, and I think these are all really very useful. And I would encourage you to jot them down. I think those are very helpful passages to keep in mind as we think about practice. Now I'm going to screen share here just so I can be jotting some things on whiteboard on my iPad. As I'm talking. There we go. All right. So, first of all, I would say that all of the things that you jotted down, those various passages, I think are very, very helpful in terms of your thinking about practice. So I would ask you to jot those down into your notes and save them. I will be jotting them down as well. I think they're very, very helpful. I'm going to point your attention in a similar but a little bit different direction. And as we think about a theology of practice, and I will not pretend that this is a full-blown theology or a fully developed theology, but just really some principles from God's Word that I think are very helpful to us. And one of the keys to this for me, in addition to the big things that you guys mentioned, but a really very direct issue is the issue of stewardship. And the passage of scripture, of course, that we would think about is Matthew 25 and the story of the servants who were each given an amount of money, and then they were expected to make more of that, to take what had been entrusted to them and to make more of it for their master, for their employer, for their owner. And it's a principle that God wants us to apply to our lives. Not necessarily, not only with money, but with everything he entrusts to us. And for our discussion, God has entrusted to you several things. He's entrusted to you a level of skill and a certain amount of knowledge up to this point, and experience. These are things God has entrusted to you at this point. But if you are to merely just stay where you are, to just stop and say, okay, this is how good I play, this is how good I sing, this is how much I know about music, that's enough, that I'm going to stop. That's not being a good steward. Now, you already are striving to be a good steward because you're studying music at BGMBC. You are seeking to enhance your knowledge and your skill and ultimately your experience. So you are already taking the right kind of step. But I want you to think about this in terms of you in the practice room, you at your church sitting at the piano or the keyboard or with your another instrument or with the voice. And what are you supposed to do with that in terms of your practice? For each of your lessons, you are required to practice a certain number of hours. What is the point of those hours? One way to think about it is, I want to get I want to get a good grade in my music lessons, and I'm supposed to get 7 hours of practice in. Therefore, I will do 7 hours of practice, and my purpose is to fulfill that requirement. That's not really enough. And if your thinking is, I just need to do those hours and then I'm done, then you are really missing the point and not applying this principle of stewardship. The practice hours are just a tool just a way of measuring and a way of accountability for you to actually be a good steward of what God has given to you, to increase what you have now by what you are adding to it. And so to be a good steward, you need to think about development, the development of your skills. That every time you go to practice, you are working to make something better. You are working to acquire a skill, or to improve a skill, or to improve some other aspect of what it means to play your instrument and to play it well. So you have to approach practice with the idea that I am not as good as I want to be or as good as I should be yet. So in the next hour, I'm going to do everything I can to make myself better in some aspect, more than one aspect of my playing. And when I say playing, I'm including everything. So this applies to voice practice, piano, violin, trumpet, kazoo, whatever instrument is your instrument. So if I say playing, I make sure you apply it to all of these areas. But you have to, what we're talking about here really is an attitude that you look at your practice time as your means of being a good steward. And this is really, really important because most people go into their music lessons with the attitude, my teacher is going to make me better. I have bad news for you. None of your teachers can make you better. Only you can. Because they don't control your hands. They don't control your voice. Now, your teachers are very well trained and have wonderful experience in teaching, and they can help you. They can point you in the right direction. They can point out your weaknesses. They can tell you how to make yourself better. They can tell you how to do that, but they cannot do it for you. Only you can do that. So when you go into the practice room, you must go in with the attitude or the desire, what can I do during this practice time to make some parts of my playing better than they were before? Of course, you have to realize that one practice session does not fix everything, even if you're focused on one thing that you want to make better. 1 hour in the practice room is not going to permanently fix what that thing is. It's a very much an incremental kind of activity. Little by little, piece by piece, you are building towards ultimate goals in your playing. Many of you are familiar with the BGMBC building. Some of you have been in it. Lord willing, sometime this year we will be back in it together. I can't wait for that day. One of the reasons I can't wait for that is because it was my job to build the building. Now that doesn't mean that I poured all the cement or dug all the holes or but I was the kind of project manager for the construction of the building. So from the design to the working with the engineers and contractors. Anyway, so I was the one who oversaw all of that construction. And although I knew a little bit about that kind of thing, I learned an awful lot, much more than I ever had known. And when you look at a finished building, we enjoy it, don't we? A finished building is something really exciting. Walk in, I remember showing off the building once we got it done, and getting to show people each of the floors and talk to them about different features and whatnot. And that's the exciting part, is seeing the completed building. However, what it took to complete that building was several years of planning, discussion, replanning, many hours of meetings, many hours of looking at materials, many hours driving around the city looking for things. And then when the actual construction started, several weeks of digging holes and breaking up stones and then laying down metal and et cetera, pouring the things that go underground, then pouring the things that come up out of the ground, and then building up. And it took a year and a half, if I remember right, to do all of that. And each piece was important. If we'd skipped one little piece of that, the ultimate building would not have been what it should be. Now, that whole building process was slow. It was painful sometimes. It was hard. It was expensive. But that's what it took to ultimately have the building. And you need to look at your practice in a very similar light. You are building something. And so the work you're doing in the practice room is not very fun sometimes. It's not exciting. It's not always going to look very nice. There will come times where it's nice, like when we were doing the building, when we were doing the stairs, and the architect and I came up with the idea of creating this vine-like metalwork for the stair railing, and then using that again up in the balcony of the auditorium. When we did that, that was really exciting, and it looked really nice. Even though the rest of the building wasn't done, that component looked really beautiful. The same thing is going to happen in your practicing. Much of what you do in your practicing will not feel very good or fun, and will not always sound very good or beautiful, but there will be moments of beauty as you are working towards the final product. But ultimately, you are building towards that final product. What is the final product? Well, you have several goals in mind. One is the actual piece of music you're working on. That obviously is a major goal of what you're doing in the practice room. You are focusing on preparing a particular piece of music. And ultimately, if you are careful, you will achieve that goal. But there's a second goal that is more of a long-term goal that's connected, and that is your musical growth. That you're not only practicing to learn the particular piece, you're practicing to build yourself up to be musically strong and adept for a lifetime of music making. So you've got several goals in mind. And that means then that as you enter, still under the idea of stewardship here, as you enter the practice room, you are entering with the goals of development that we've just been talking about, and that means you are entering purposefully. Let me clean that up. You are entering purposefully. You have a plan. You have the goals that you're going after. You should not ever enter the practice room wondering, what am I going to do today? What am I going to practice today? You already know, because you're thinking about all the things that we have been talking about. So ultimately, you've got to realize that you are the one to make yourself better. And again, I do not say this to minimize the importance of your teachers, because they're going to give you things from their knowledge, from their practicing, from their experience that you don't know yet. They will have faced challenges that you are facing now, and they have found ways to get past those challenges or to achieve goals and found ways to do it effectively. And so they are going to be your guides and they are going to be your help. But the ultimate achievement is going to be on your shoulders. So if in the end you've been taking lessons for 3 months and you feel like you're not making any progress, most likely it's your fault. Dr. Bob Jones Sr., the evangelist, had a wonderful saying that I use in the conducting classes, and here it is. No doubt the problem is with you. Remember that. Write that in your practice notebook. I hope each of you has a notebook. Your private teachers have probably talked to you about this or will. You ought to have a dedicated notebook where you write down what your teacher tells you, where you keep a log of your practicing, and like specific log, like today at 3 o'clock I practiced, and here's what I practiced. Here are the measures I worked on. Here's the problems I want to fix next time. And you should keep a little diary, a little log. But on the cover of that, or on the inside, I want you to write this statement down, all right? So keep a diary or practice journal and write in it at every practice. You don't have to write a huge amount, but write something in it to help you stay on track. Write down your goals, write down your teacher's goals, etc. A great example of all of this in scriptures, if we think about stewardship as a biblical principle and an important goal for us, a great picture of this that we won't take time to go back to look at, but the temple musicians in the time of Solomon. When you read in, I believe it's First Chronicles, David's organization of the priests, including the musicians, you discover that there are a bunch of priests whose job is to teach and train others, and then the younger Levites who would become the temple musicians trained for something like 20 years. 20 years of practicing and training and studying before they ministered in the temple. That's amazing. It's a good picture for us. You know, if you think about it, by the time you finish at BGMBC, you will be over 20 years old. Some of you already are. If you're studying music, you already have had some years of study, maybe informal or formal, as well as here. My own example, I began playing a musical instrument in grade 6. I already had been learning about music in school, but in grade 6, that's when I first got serious about it. So from grade 6 onward, so by the time I got to college, I had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 7 years of pretty serious music practice, music lessons, playing in a band, singing in a choir. So I had 7 years. Then college, I was in college for 5 years. That's 12 years. And then master's degree, 2 more years, 13, 14. And then I did my doctorate. That did take about 6 years. So that's 20 years. There you go. Temple musician. I'm ready now to finally serve. Good thing I made it before I was 60. So you want to have that same kind of seriousness as you think about practicing. Now, a second theological component I want you to think about is this. Fulfilling God's call on your life. God has called you to make music a major part of what you are doing for Him. Then you need to prepare yourself to do that work. Now, this is related, obviously, to being a good steward, but this is a little bit more focused, thinking about God's particular call for you. And if music is a part of that call to service and ministry, then you need to prepare yourself well to fulfill that call. A good example of this would be the Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul had years of training as a Pharisee, and then he had years or time at least of training under Christians when he first got saved. And then there was a time where he spent in the wilderness alone with the Lord. So he had significant time of training. Why? So that he could do the work God had called him to do, to be the apostle to the Gentiles. That took special gifts, special training. And so you want to think about your practicing and your music lessons as your equipping for a very special call from the Lord. Another example that I've already referenced is the priests in the Old Testament. Their positions were ordained by God, not by David, even though David was the organizer, but God is the one who ordained those positions. And they spent years training, not only to be a good steward, but to specifically fulfill the work God had called them to. And lastly, I would suggest to you the apostles. The apostles spent almost 3 years being trained by Jesus for a work that God was calling them to. And so when you think about practicing in your music lessons, think about your time in the practice room as a part of your preparation to fulfill God's call. You see, it's very easy to look at all of those hours and you think, okay, my piano lessons are 1 unit, but I've got to spend 8 hours in the practice room. That's just not, that's inordinate. You know, my 1 unit Bible class only takes 2 hours of work during the week. Why should I be giving 8 hours to this? Because it's a part of your training. This is what it takes. So in one way, that's good. You do not need to feel guilty about the hours you spend in the practice room. No need to feel guilty. And when you feel like it's a waste of time or you really shouldn't be giving it that much time, then remember that what you're doing in that practice room is helping you get ready to do what God has called you to do. You're not going to take music lessons for the rest of your life, but this is the time God has given you to build up. Now, another thing to keep in mind, and I can't take time to go into it in much detail, Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened there. I don't know if my internet blinked. Did everybody else kind of go off there for a while, or was it just me?
Kayo lang po, Dr. B.
Okay, all right. Not sure what happened. I'm glad it got us back on. All right, so I was talking about the issue of beauty and the role of that in your thinking about practicing. And the main thing I want you to understand there is achieving beauty. Sorry, I'm just connecting. There we go. Achieving beauty takes significant sacrifice. It takes significant time. It takes expense. And it takes something that feels like selfishness sometimes. Now, I'm not encouraging you to be selfish, but to achieve beauty means you have to say no to lots of other things. It takes all of these things to achieve beauty. So when I say selfishness, maybe a better way to put it is single-mindedness. A quick example of this, I wish I had more time to talk about it, but during the quarantine, we for some time have been planning on doing some redecorating of our condo, the sala area, and we had some plans. We have a good architect friend who's a member of our church, and so we had started talking about, I guess I felt like I was needing to do something more after we finished the BJMBC building. I needed to do something else with a building. So we started developing these plans with a wonderful architect friend. And then during the quarantine, we finished developing those plans. And then as soon as people were allowed to go back to work, we started getting some people in and helping. And anyway, we kind of transformed our sala. Sometime I'm going to create a little video tour and I'll share it with you. Hopefully I'll get you over here someday once we get back to normal. But anyway, it was weeks and weeks of work. Now, I was doing other things. Some of the work I did myself, and Evan and me, or my wife. A lot of it we had workers coming in to do things also, of course, a lot of the big stuff. But whether I was actually doing the work myself or just overseeing it, I had to be thinking about it a lot, all the time, to kind of fix things, come up with ideas, think of questions to ask the architect. In other words, I had to sacrifice. I had to be single-minded. Time, of course, it costs money. Beauty takes those things. You've got to keep that in mind. To achieve beauty in music is going to take all of these things. There's no shortcut. No shortcut. In fact, one psychologist doing some really serious research on what it takes to achieve skill in anything suggests that it takes about 10,000 hours of serious work on doing something to reach mastery. To reach mastery and excellence. And I think that he's pretty accurate about that. Now, don't get discouraged. It doesn't mean you're going to do all that in 1 year. You won't. But you've got to realize this is the kind of thing it takes to achieve beauty. Now, lastly, I promised you some vocal specifics, and here we are in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the class. To practice vocal things. If you're taking voice lessons, you will be eventually. Everybody has to take at least a little bit of voice, and because you're serving in a church, singing is a part of what you do. You can't help it. So, some vocal, practical considerations. Try to have a quiet place. Now that's true for any practicing, but especially true for vocal, because your instrument is your body. And if you're in a very noisy place, you will tend to want to sing louder than the noise around you. And that's going to lead you potentially towards damage and whatnot. So try to have, as much as possible, a quiet place. Also, try to practice in a place that is acoustically live. Not a tiny little bedroom, but maybe a classroom or your church auditorium, a space where your voice can actually go out from your body more than 1 meter. All right? If possible, try to practice someplace live. That will help your voice to sound a little bit more natural, and you'll get better feedback. If you're only always practicing in a really small, muscle-keep space, it will never feel good. And when you're practicing voice, part of your vocal practice is related to how it feels to you. So try to be in a more acoustically live. Now, not like, I don't think you have to worry about this, but not like in a cathedral with lots of echo. So it should be live, but a little bit on the dry side. Okay? And then stay hydrated. Again, your body is, your voice or your instrument is your body. Your vocal folds need to stay hydrated. They need to have moisture. So you need to be drinking a lot of water regularly anyway, all the time, and then have water with you when you're practicing. And then the last thing, pay attention to your posture. That's true for any practicing, of course, but it's really vital to your vocal work that you do the things your voice teacher tells you. You do the things that I've told you in chorus as well, and Ms. Militar, in terms of your posture, body position, and whatnot. And if you will pay attention to these things, you're setting yourself up for success in terms of what you do with your voice. Okay? All right. I did not restart the recording, or maybe did it continue to record? No, it didn't. So these last few minutes, unfortunately, are not on the recording. All right, I was going to try to have some time for questions, but we are out of time right now. So if you do have some specific things you want to ask me about, please drop me a line. But I hope that these thoughts will strengthen you, encourage you for what you're going to do in the practice room. It's exciting, but practicing is lonely work. It is. And if you have a right foundation, theologically, philosophically, for what you're going to do in the practice room, that's going to help you through the loneliness and through the frustrations when you feel like I'm practicing day after day, and I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Sometimes it does feel like that. And having this right attitude and these right goals is going to help you. Sometimes we hit a plateau, and you just got to keep hammering away at that plateau, and then you break through, and then you keep climbing again till you reach another plateau, and then you're going to have to hammer away at that one, break through, and go on. So anyway, I hope these things will help you in that. My wife's lectures will give you a lot more really direct, practical help in these things. But I hope this will help you lay a good foundation. All right, I am going to stop there. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you po, Dr. B.
Walang anuman.